Hello, everyone, and welcome to Draft FM, a new Sumer Sports show where I and Matt Stopsky will be taking you through all the ins and outs of the 2025 draft. We'll be having guests on, we'll be breaking down mock drafts, big boards, and taking you through how NFL teams actually approach this true season. This may be the off season, but it's the true season for a lot of people in the NFL. So today, first, we're going to be taking you through me and Stopsky's first mock draft. So let's bring him in. Stopsky, how you doing, brother?
What's up, man? Listen, I was always the weird one in football. I always enjoy the season coming to an end so we can get to the draft. I don't know, man, maybe it's the hope and optimism leading into the next season where like you feel like you're in it again. So I love this part of the year. Love this part of the year, and I'm excited to get going with this.
It's going to be great. So later on in the show, we'll be bringing on CBS Sports' draft analyst, Mike Renner. But before we get to that, let's run through this first mock draft. A couple of ground rules here, Stopsky. No trades. You're going to have the number one pick because we're very nice. We wanted to let you select number 3 for your New York Giants.
Appreciate that.
And we're going to try to limit the scope, the amount of people that we can select as much as possible. We're going to try to keep it to the top 20 on the consensus big board, according to Mock Draft Database. But before this, you identified something that was a little interesting about this draft, about how bad these teams are, at least record-wise, how poor these teams were according to past seasons. How do you think that's going to affect the way that these teams end up drafting?
You know, it's really interesting. Usually we see like a lot of teams in that 7 to 9 win range, like 13, 14, 15. Now it's like only like 8. The Washington Commanders that picked number 2 last year wouldn't even pick in the top 3 based on their record. So it was a lot of the disparity between the worst and the best teams in the NFL was very large this year. And I don't know how it's going to affect the draft. It's really interesting how it affects the draft. But I really want to see if there's going to be a trend going forward if we might lose the middle class of the NFL.
It's interesting, too, because the middle class of the NFL was typically the teams that probably had quarterbacks set, but were really struck by injuries. And we've talked so much about the middle class of quarterbacks, whether that's the Sam Darnolds of the world or the Baker Mayfields, or even going down to the younger quarterbacks, the CJ Strouds, the Bryce Youngs. And if we really do see the hollowing out of that middle class, I think the teams that are lower on the totem pole will be more likely to move on to younger quarterbacks just because of the contracts and how cheap they are. And so I'm really hoping that doesn't happen. I love a good 7-9 team. I was really thankful that the Bengals really decided to strike it out all year and try to make the playoffs despite, tanking probably being in their best interest. And it'll be interesting to see, especially because this class does not have the best quarterbacks of all time as compared to the last 2 classes. And so with that, I think that's a great segue into our mock draft, Stopsky. Pick one. The Titans are on the clock. Who you going with?
So right now, I don't really want to talk too much about between Shedeur versus Cam. We'll talk about them as the months go on, and we have like a real breakdown. We'll bring in some of our experts as well. I'm just going to go with the big board here, right? Shedeur Sanders is still the number 1 quarterback in the big board. I will go with Shedeur Sanders right now. We don't know who the GM's going to be yet in Tennessee. Yep. That can make a lot of changes. So we'll see if it's a GM that has history of trading. That could definitely be a trade out spot. Also, what's the future of the coach in Tennessee? Like, I'm sure that the Tennessee situation is very interesting to me. I'm not sure how it's going to play out. So right now, let's just slot in the number 1 quarterback. Shedeur Sanders goes to Nashville.
And that makes my job really easy too, because I think the Browns are going to select a quarterback, probably, in quotes, no matter who it is. I think there's a clear tier, at least right now, in the consensus of Shedeur and Cam Ward from Miami. And I think this makes it easy for them, much like it was for the Texans a couple years ago, where they're just going to slot in and take Cam Ward. A couple notes on the Browns. They played Deshaun Watson, Jameis Winston, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and Bailey Zappi, just to add, names to the list of the poor Browns fans' jacket of every quarterback they've had since Tim Couch. They need a quarterback. I think Andrew Berry is wanting to draft a quarterback. I think they need a hard reset after Deshaun Watson. Cam Ward probably is the best quarterback just based off initial ratings and based off of Sumer Sports' detailed artificial intelligence ratings in the draft class, 95th percentile in decision making, production over expected, and all in one passing metric. The dude's a good player. I think he'll slot in for the Browns easily at 2. And now it's time for the Giants to pick Stopsky.
Yeah, great. Uh, so we're going to go chalk here and take Travis Hunter, right? If we consider there's no trades, the Giants are not taking Jalen Milroe at 3, at least not yet. We'll see how his combine does. Would not surprise me if he had a Anthony Richardson type rise post combine, because he's a great athlete, right?
Right.
And great athletes tend to rise over this time of year. So we'll see how that changes in terms of where his position is on the big board. Right now, his big board spot's like around 13, 14, 15. So I can see the Giants maybe trying to trade out there. But if they can't and they're stuck here and Milroe stays in that like mid first round grade, Travis Hunter is an incredible cornerback. There's a lot of talk about him going both ways in terms of him playing some receiver. But even if he couldn't play receiver, he would still be a top 3 pick for me. Like he's a 94th percentile AI coverage corner. And you see some of the ball skills he has on film. It's incredible. And the Giants need help at outside corner. Tay Banks had a bad year this year where he got benched. And Cordell Flott was playing out there. Nick McDonald. It was a rough group for the New York Giants. Andrew Phillips looked really good, but Phillips is in the slot. So they need a true lockdown corner because if they keep rolling out Adoree Jackson post-retirement to play corner, it's going to be another rough year for the New York Giants.
Certainly. I think Travis Hunter as well is the rare player that can kind of change the face of a team despite not being a quarterback. And I know there's been much chagrin with the Giants about that this year with Saquon Barkley. The one question that I do have for you, if they are not going to go quarterback, is I'm assuming the option now would be to hit free agency or look to trade for a quarterback. Is there anyone in mind off the top of your head, if you were to select Travis Hunter right here, who you would look for?
Yeah, so I've been talking about how they should acquire 3 different quarterbacks through 3 different avenues. They should be signing a quarterback, whether that's a Justin Fields or a Geno Smith that gets released or a Derek Carr if he gets released. I would actually trade for Anthony Richardson or Joe Milton in New England, and then I would draft like a Jackson Dart in this draft, and you have open competition and see who wins. That's really at this point. Don't walk in there with the clear winner. That's how you end up with Daniel Jones starting in 2024. Like go in with an actual competition with kind of guys in the same archetype, right? Like some good athletes. That's what Brian Dable likes to coach. Dable is coming back for 2025. Give him quarterbacks that he likes to work with and to see who wins. Because there isn't a clear cut, this is the guy that's going to fix our problem. They have to kind of throw a bunch of darts at it to see how it works out.
Right. I think that allows them to address the problems that did not allow Daniel Jones to be a good quarterback. And I think a team who's drafting right after the Giants in that have to do that is the Patriots. I think Drake May is their future there. I liked what I saw from him this year. And they're faced with this kind of problem of, do we go wide receiver like the Bengals did years ago when they had Joe Burrow with Ted McMillan on the board still here? Or do we go with the offensive line, which really struggled this year and very similar to that draft, like the Lions did, and go ahead and draft a kind of swing lineman that you believe in and draft a swing lineman that you believe in and allow him to play and allow him to be the cornerstone of an offensive line in front of Drake May. There's also an option to go on the defense, but they have mostly the same personnel coming back on the defensive side of the ball. They were very good 2 years ago. They were very bad this year. I think they're going to kind of keep the motion the same on the defensive side of the ball. That's why I think they're going to go with Kelvin Banks, swing offensive lineman out of UT Austin. He has great metrics, and I think he's just a quality building block for that offensive line.
No, so I agree. I was surprised you took Kelvin because of where he's currently ranked in the big board, but he's a great player. So if his stock rises, which I imagine him and Will Campbell's stock are going to rise together in the next couple of weeks, I could see this playing out.
So moving forward to Jacksonville, there's a lot going on in Jacksonville. New head coach, almost certainly. Perhaps a new GM. It seems like Balky is locked in there for now. Don't really know what the direction, what the vision of the Jacksonville Jaguars will be, but who do you think slots in best at this pick?
Dude, it's always so hard to pick for coaches that don't exist yet.
Yeah.
So we really don't know what's going to happen in Jacksonville. And we say Balky is safe, but Shad Khan didn't make it seem, like he was that safe. He was like, "Yeah, we got him for now," and it's like, oh, "All right, we'll see how this plays out." So right now, I'm just looking at the roster, how it's constructed. Their interior defensive line is pretty weak. They don't really have a true stud there. Eric Armstead's been talking about moving inside, but he's like almost 32 years old at this point. Mason Graham from Michigan is incredible. Over 96 percentile in both our AI pass rush and run defense. Great. Like that's a true difference maker at the interior. Just take it and go.
Right. I think Mason Graham is going to be one of those guys that, because he plays defensive tackle, is going to get boxed out by team need and get
Mm-hmm.
boxed out by positional value. But he really does have an argument for one of the best players in the draft, period. I mean, he's great in the run game, great in the pass game, and has been a absolute wrecking ball for Michigan over the years. Moving on to the Raiders, I think this is a situation where the Raiders are not a super talented team. They're now going to have a new general manager and a new head coach. They're going to want to go in a different direction. I think they are a true candidate to try to move up for a quarterback. But in the context of this mock draft, I think they just go with the most talented player in terms of, expected draft position, in terms of consensus big board. Right now, that is Will Johnson. He slots in for Nate Hobbs, who was a pretty good cornerback last year, 80th percentile in our coverage metrics, but he will be likely leaving due to his contract ending. Will Johnson slots in right there. Now we're at another more interesting team, another team that will be having a new general manager, a new head coach, but that has a substantially better roster in both the consensus's opinion and in my opinion, and that's the New York Jets. Stopsky, who do you think the New York Jets are going to get to try to revive this team and all its good players?
Again, picking for people that don't exist yet, always hard. But living in New York and hearing Jet fans complain about that offensive line, Tyron Smith, Morgan was both free agents next year and both, heading to retirement pretty soon. They need to go with another tackle. I know they got Olufashanu last year and he played pretty well during his time, but they need another tackle. And Will Campbell's on the board, right? He is an incredible run blocker, 95th percentile, an AI run blocking grade. Slot him right in there, get a young offensive line for whoever is playing quarterback for the New York Jets, whether it's Aaron Rodgers or whoever they decide to get. Those kind of questions won't be answered until after we find out who the GM is going to be, or if Rodgers decides to take a permanent darkness retreat, whatever happens in New York. But right now, with how the board is laying out, Will Campbell probably the pick.
Will Campbell is going to be someone who grinds my gears the entirety of the draft season, so I might as well just set it up here because he's a guy where the proof is in the pudding. He's been a productive both run and pass blocker throughout his career, and he's been extremely successful at LSU. He's just a guy that the eye test confuses me about, and it's just because of his stance. He stands up so straight in his stance, and he's a huge guy, and I wonder how that is going to progress to the next level, because me as a former defensive player, that's something I would immediately identify, particularly against guys like who I have slotted at the next pick, who can really bend the corner and get low at the edge position. And this is my favorite pick in the whole draft, Stopsky.
Okay.
The Carolina Panthers, I was a big believer in them preseason. I'm still a pretty big believer in them, in the middle of the season when I shouldn't have been. They ended up finishing off pretty well, particularly Bryce Young, and the offense looked pretty good. The defense was atrocious.
Yeah.
The way to rebuild that, there's no better way than drafting a quality edge rusher, and that's Abdul Carter. We just watched him play against Notre Dame, absolutely dominant despite being injured. I think he's probably not going to make it to this point. I think he's probably going to light the combine up. I think there's a real shot that he's even considered for the first pick if there's some trade back shenanigans or something going on with the quarterbacks. I think he is certainly going to be very high up on people's big boards, and he would just be an absolute perfect pick for the Panthers.
I agree, and we'll hear Mike Renner's opinion on him later. But he's a guy that I could see moving up and being in the top 5. So But keep pounding them, man. While we can, keep pounding and let
I'm
him go to
begging.
Carolina.
I
Oh,
am
dude,
begging all the teams in the NFL to let him drop.
imagine him and Derek Brown, because like everyone
Oh,
forgets, like
man.
people do forget that Derek Brown was not there for the entire season. So you put
Exactly.
him with Derek Brown, man, like that could be a really good defensive line. Like the Panthers are a quietly a team that we should all kind of be looking at for 2025.
Man, I'm not quietly doing it. I'm loudly putting my life on the line for the Panthers. And a team in that division selecting right after them is the New Orleans Saints.
Oh, well, I know you're going to love this one. So I went with Ted McMillan, the receiver. Right now, MVS is probably not coming back, right? Olave and Shaheed have a ton of injury issues right now. And the Saints are in like cap hell, like worse than cap hell, like the deepest level of cap hell. I want them taking the best player available, which right now is Ted McMillan. But I know you feel a little differently about this. So go ahead, Saints fan. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Look, the problem with their offense this year, bar none, was the fact that they were playing practice squad wide receivers all year. And so this solves that problem. The question is that going to solve their problems as a team with the cap and with their evaluation of players and blah, 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 blah? My answer, I think, is no. I think they have to solve the defensive problems at this point because they are aging so much on the defensive side of the ball at each level. Cam Jordan at the defensive line level, Demario Davis at the mid level, Tyrann Mathieu on the back end. And you just need cornerstone players that are extremely talented right now. And that's who I'm going to select with the next pick with the Bears. But I think Mykel Williams would be a great fit for them coming out of Georgia. Mykel Williams, one of the best edge rushers in this draft, has been productive over the last 2 years, an extremely effective pass rusher, an extremely effective run defender. And I just think he's a guy who you can kind of build a defense around. And I just think that that'll be, more helpful to the Saints than the wide receiver position in the long term, though it probably will not be in the short term.
But like, who you throwing the ball to though? Like that's the question. Like, Juwan Johnson's hinge free agency. Like it's not like they have the money to bring in free agents, right? T. Higgins isn't coming to New Orleans. Like who are they throwing the ball to? Like,
I think you kind of have to, given that you have Shaheed on a team friendly deal for the next year, and you have Olave coming back as well. You just hope that the injury luck breaks correctly with them, and you try to go address other positions. And I think wide receiver at this point is a position where on a year over year draft basis, there are going to be good guys to select both in day one and day two. And I think it can kind of be addressed over the years where I don't know, number one, if there's going to be the level of quality of edge rusher as there is in this draft in future drafts. And also at their current pick, I think it just makes more sense to go edge rusher there.
All right. Well, we'll continue this argument as we go through the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Game and the Combine. Also, we'll see what they do in free agency. But right now, like I understand the need for defense, but I'm looking at this New Orleans offensive skill group, and I am underwhelmed and scared because I was like, I love Olave, but like, what's his future as well?
Yeah. Again, as you noted, it's hard to draft for head coaches who you don't know who they're going to be. And it's going to be a similar position for a lot of these top 10 teams, including the Bears, who I just selected Mykel Williams for. Like that Bears team could break any direction. I mean, they could try to buffer the passing room and try to get everything out of Caleb. The defense was average, not terrible this year. They could, I think probably their best bet is either A, to trade back, or B, just draft the most talented player that they think is on the board. You think there's going to be any deviation for that from the Bears?
Does Ben Johnson end with the Bears? Like that's like the question, right? If is Ben Johnson picking the groceries? So maybe, I don't know. We'll know more in the next couple of weeks as these teams start to hire GMs and head coaches.
Certainly. So that's the first top 10 picks of our mock draft. We're going to bring in Mike Renner, who will be talking about a wide range of things about the draft and about Notre Dame football a little bit too. Really excited to have him on. So let's take a break and move to that interview. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Draft FM. We have our first guest of the draft season here, the real season, We have Mike Renner from CBS Sports. Mike, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I love that you call it the real season because to me, it's my real season. It's still real to me, damn it.
Well, speaking of, you got the Notre Dame shirt on today. We still got a little bit left of the Notre Dame season. I'm a
Yes.
Notre Dame alum as well. I want to ask you a little bit. There's this sliding doors moment that I've been identifying of where Marcus Freeman is at Cincinnati. He's choosing between LSU and Notre Dame, ends up going to Notre Dame. Then Brian Kelly jumps to LSU, becomes the head coach there. Now Notre Dame playing in the college football playoff, looks primed to win a national championship. At least I know we both hope so. What are your views about how that could have gone wrong? And do you think Notre Dame would be in the same spot that they are today if, BK just stays and all of a sudden Marcus Freeman's at LSU?
I don't. I don't think they'd be in the same spot. I was of the opinion that when Brian Kelly jumped to LSU, that it was potentially the best thing to happen to Notre Dame. Now, obviously that depended on what they ended up going at the head coaching position. But once Freeman was the guy, to me, I thought that was the perfect transition to where Notre Dame needed to go into this new weird future that is, NIL, transfer portal. When that's the case, you can't coach the way Brian Kelly has coached, in my opinion. Like, you cannot be a guy who is not necessarily a player's coach, but like a guy who rules with an iron fist at the top. You just get guys at the bottom of your roster leaving. I was very worried about how he transitioned to it. And I think LSU has their worries as well now about it. You need someone who is a player's coach, someone who can recruit not only on the recruiting trail, but recruits you every single day with you wanting to show up and be a part of that culture that he's building. And so Marcus Freeman, from the first moment I met him, when he walked into the PFF offices after he got the Notre Dame defensive coaching job, he came over to us. He was a guy that just commanded the room, commanded his staff, and was willing to learn no matter what. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, that's what you want at that position at the University of Notre Dame, especially. So, not to say I expected it to be this good this early, that they'd be here right now, but I was very happy when they hired him. And I think this is the start of what is going to be one of the best schools in terms of transitioning into this new wave of college football. I think Notre Dame's as well situated as anyone to take advantage of it.
I certainly agree. And I think the biggest highlight of the difference at this point is for years, LSU was DBU, Tyrann Mathieu, Patrick Peterson, Morris Claiborne. And now it's goes without saying, Notre Dame's defensive backfield is substantially better than LSU's. And now they have a bunch of guys who are probably going to be big draft candidates. And that's what we're here to talk about today, Mike. So first, I just want to ask you, we're early on. We haven't even hit the combine yet. What is your draft process looking like right now?
Right now, it's honestly playing catch up. In my first year here at CBS, I'm probably more behind than I've ever been at this point in time. Unfortunately, I hate to be your first guest saying that, but it's more usually like I was focusing on draft from day one of the college football season until now. So I was like, honestly, I would have full evals done on the first round at minimum by this time. And I just don't, unfortunately. I've watched all the guys, though. I just haven't done the full background and all that sort of stuff. But so my process is basically getting that done right now because I've had to focus so much on NFL. But honestly, I've loved having to focus on NFL this year because one of the biggest things when you just watch draft prospects is you forget what the NFL game looks like at some point. You're watching college guys, and subconsciously you can't help it. You start comparing them just to college guys, and you forget what the archetype looks like at the NFL at times, and what true greatness is supposed to look like once you get to the NFL football field. And so that's what you're chasing. Ultimately, it is not the guy who's the best on the collegiate football field. It's the guy who can develop into the best on the NFL football field. So right now, to me, it's just watching tape first and foremost. It's not analytic profiles yet. It's not, combine numbers just yet. It's just how does their tape look? What kind of athletes are these guys? Who are they going to be at the next level? And what kind of role are they going to fill? That's where I'm at right now. So just a lot of grinding of tape.
Coming from the other side, the data science and analytics side, it's always been difficult, as you highlighted, to project that quarterback position, the most important position, from college to the pros. And we've seen, particularly in this season, a bunch of different ways that can go. You look at the 2023 draft class, Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, they've been shaky. I think Bryce Young looks a little bit better. right now. You highlighted that on some shows earlier in the week. And then CJ Stroud takes a downturn. But then you look at the 2024 draft class, all those guys seem to be playing pretty well. You look at draft classes before, a lot of guys who were out of the mix, Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, are all the way back into the mix and paid really highly as compared to what we expected even a year or two ago. And so when you are trying to do that college to pro projection, do you think that any of the recent 2024 season occurrences with these mid-level players who have either jumped up to a higher level or continuing improving or taking a downturn from what we expected, how is that going to change how you evaluate the 2025 draft class?
I do think some of the recent success here, especially this past year's class, is going to make me rethink a little what I value with quarterback position. And I think just the biggest thing is seeing Caleb Williams versus other guys in this draft class, whether it's Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Jane Daniels, Drake. I think all the other guys had more successful rookie seasons than the number one overall pick. And that's not to say that it's going to like for sure, going forward that it's going to be that way. I think we've learned our lesson, even just this last year, right, with Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, not to make immediate declarations about a quarterback. And even going back to like the Goff, Wentz, Dak year, it's like every single year there was a different guy at the top of that class, it seemed like. So I'm not going to declare that it's done with him, but I do think some of the traits that some of those guys had, specifically Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, those guys were incredible at avoiding sacks while not turning those sack avoiding plays into negative plays, like interceptions, right? And you saw that happen right out the gate with them. Whereas Caleb Williams, on the flip side, was terrible at avoiding sacks. And his performance under pressure was basically amounted to, if he was under pressure, the play had to come like outside of structure. He was not going to make a play within structure under pressure from the pocket. That's a big thing. And I think Justin Fields' lack of success also pointed to that in his profile coming out of Ohio State. That's something that going forward that I always coveted, like what a guy did from the pocket in terms of handling that pressure, being able to stay in there and deliver and, not take negative plays via sack. But I thought it could be overcame if you were good enough in other areas of the field. I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. And I don't think Caleb Williams is doomed by any means. But I do just think that that's a trait that I am going to hold above, almost any when projecting to the next level, just because of how important it becomes, especially with the blitzes we're seeing at the NFL level. Like if you can't hold in when your pocket's muddy and deliver the football down the football field, your offense is going to go up and down and up and down at the NFL level. It's just not going to be consistent. So that to me is the one thing that, having watched this year, I'm like, I think I'm going to hold that a little higher than I even did in past years.
So let's lock it in on the 2025 draft. The Titans are sitting there at the number one pick. Shocker, they move on from Rand Carthon yesterday. Didn't really expect that. Both prior and after week 18, you had quarterbacks going with the number one pick. Obviously, now the Titans are sitting in that position. You also had a Jets trade a couple weeks ago up in order to get that pick in a little bit of a different situation. Given that the Titans are going to be moving forward with Callahan as their head coach, despite the shuffle at the front office level, is this a sign that the Titans may not trade down and that they're going to lock in on a quarterback and be selecting with that number one pick?
I think they have to, right? I think I don't know if the Carthon thing was directly related to the draft. To me, if I had to point to why he gets canned after 2 years, it's that they gave out a record amount of guaranteed money last offseason and sucked this year. It's like when you do that, when you outlay as much as they did in free agency and via trade with the L'Jarius Sneed move, it's like those guys better make an impact and your team better be better the next year, because that's a lot of money for an owner to put out of their bank account for fans not to show up in December, right? So I think that's why Carthon got axed. I don't think it necessarily had to deal with how his opinion on this upcoming quarterback class and a difference with Brian Callahan. But I do worry because I think Cam Ward is the unquestioned number one. I think NFL teams will end up agreeing. Just his traits, his tools are light years better than Shadur's, and those are kind of the two guys right now. But he's not really a in structure or Brian Callahan sort of quarterback, right? Like he's not just going to operate that offense the way Joe Burrow did. It's not even going to be close. So I think it's a little bit of a mismatch, and I'd be interested to see where Tennessee goes and if they are willing to move on. But it's like We'll know that soon because they'll have to go make a move for someone else. Because I think you could be pretty clear at this point. It ain't Will Levis. I think what we saw from him and his just lack of awareness from the pocket is not changing anytime soon. So I think Cam Ward's ultimately the pick. Gun to my head right now, if I had to guess. But again, if not, they'll make a move in free agency. I don't think we'll just roll into the draft, see them trade down, and go with Will Levis in the future.
Getting into that breakdown of Cam Ward and Shador Sanders, you can find Mike's work on CBSSports.com. You've written a couple times about the best players in this draft, and the mock drafts that I've seen most recently from you and your colleagues, it's been those two at the top, and then it seems like there's a drop off until you get to the Jalen Milrose of the world and some of the other quarterbacks. What do you think the major differentiating factor between those two subsets of quarterbacks are?
At one, I think it's just no one else played well, right? I mean, if you look at just Jalen, it's one is performance, like wholesale. The only guy who performed in like a realm close to them, and I thought it was actually very good this year and surprising, was Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. If you just like statistically week in and week out, I thought Dart was good. And truthfully, he may end up as my quarterback 3 in this draft class. I thought he took a big step forward from a year ago, just in how he handled pressure and how he was able to keep his eyes down the football field and attack even when, it used to be, I mean, not even used to be, that offense is just so gimmicky in what they run. It's a lot of like these underneath out routes or like these 2-man route concepts that he's just looking at 2 guys and deciding which one to throw between. And I thought he even did better in terms of when the 2-man route wasn't there, having more answers than he did in years prior. So that aside, back to Shador and Cam, what separates them is not only performance, but then creativity is the biggest thing. Is those guys looked comfortable when it was on them to make a play, right? I think that's where the game's going at the NFL level. Everyone we've reached the point where most OCs know how to scheme up some semblance of quality pass concept. Not all, but most. But there's always a perfect defense for offense at times. You will never always have guys open every single play. Just sometimes that ain't the case. So it's the guys who are really separating themselves at the NFL level who can, once that's not there, go make a play themselves, go get a bucket. Scorers in the NBA. It's like scorer versus shooter. We need more scorers at the quarterback position. Everyone's looking for that. Shador and Cam Ward are scorers wholesale. That's what their game is predicated on. Maybe too much, you can argue, for both of them, and that'll be picked apart all draft season. But those guys have that. Carson Beck doesn't have that. Jalen Milroe has that with his legs, not as much with his arm. And so that trait is probably, if you're looking for one, that's what separates those two.
Certainly. And then looking at the top of the draft, as you mentioned, there is some question of whether the top 2 teams will end up taking quarterbacks. I think the Giants are a team, I really don't know where they're going to go. But let's say there's a team that's drafting a little bit later. Who do you think the most desperate franchise drafting later in the draft who may be wanting to trade up will be? I know you had the Jets trading up in one mock draft. I think that makes sense given the strength of their roster right now, and some of the players received multiple Pro Bowl votes from all of us at Sumer Sports. Who do you think really needs to lock in a quarterback in this draft certified?
I like the Jets. I still do, just because of where they're at. Like, that's a good team. That's a good roster. It wasn't a good team because they were horribly coached, right? But it's a good roster of talent that if you put a good roster of talent and then the rookie quarterback hits, the second rounder, maybe the next year's first rounder, I don't know what it's going to take for them to get up and go get someone. Those become almost irrelevant at that point because you got the rookie contract talent. You got so many guys who are cheap right now, whether it's Jermaine Johnson, who was unfortunately injured, but Olu Fashanu was a great pick. Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, those guys are cheap. And yeah, they're approaching like 4th, 5th year and that sort of thing. But even with how contracts go, it's like they don't really hit until year 6 and 7, the big cap hits at those positions. So you have a window that if you were to hit on that quarterback position, draft picks wouldn't be that meaningful. So that's the one team I point to. Like, a lot of people say the Raiders need to, but they still stink. They need the draft picks. Like, they need the draft capital. Giving up future first, that could be the number 1 overall pick if they did so. So I don't think they're in that mix. I do just think it's the Jets who are uniquely qualified to be there. I don't see the Giants doing it because with what they did with their front office, those guys need to save their jobs. You draft a quarterback in the first round, chances are he's not great. and you're out the door. So they're going to go sign a vet. They're probably going to make a play for like a Kirk Cousins, a Sam Darnold to really get a level of play they know is better than what Daniel Jones gave them. We'll see if that works out, but I do just think a lot of the other teams in the top 10, it doesn't make sense, especially when it's this quarterback class. It's not it's not Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, right? It's guys who are a clear tier behind them that you're trading up for to go get.
So talking about those teams like the Giants who may not necessarily be in the market because of their front office situation. The last big board you released was about a month ago, 2 months ago. Has there been any major shuffles amongst the non-quarterbacks in the last couple months, bowl games, etc., in the college season? Has anyone moved up that big board?
Gosh, you're putting me on the spot because I actually don't even remember what I put for that big board. But I will say the guy who I think has moved up the most, or maybe not even the most because I was still high on him then, but who I'm watching now and I'm like, man, this guy is the best player in terms of just like grade in this draft class. It's Abdul Carter from Penn State. The more I watch him, the more I see truly special, truly, I'm not willing to say like Von Miller sort of talent, but he is as good. He's better than any edge rusher we saw come out a year ago. He is in a realm that, that the guys who I've given out that sort of grade to, that I've been that sort of high on, there's really like one miss I've had over the years, and that's Chase Young. And people are still wondering what the heck happened with Chase Young at this point in time. So it's a mass. I think he's special and at a position where that position, like you take highly, right? It goes number one overall. It gets covered at the top of the draft. So he's the guy I go back to where I'm like watching him down the stretch this season. And his first year playing edge for Penn State, to be that good and just the athlete that he is, I see a guy that I would take over Travis Hunter at this point in time.
Wow. And it's interesting because you're highlighting an edge, which you said on Twitter. You can find Mike at Mike Renner _ on Twitter, that you think edge is probably the most loaded position group right now. You had two guys on your big board that caught my eye. The first, Central Arkansas, David Walker. The second, who you tweeted about today, Mike Green, Marshall. My first inclination seeing those guys who are from, the FCS or G5 levels is to go look at our Sumer Sports AI metrics. They popped across the board. We only have a couple of snaps from the FCS. David Walker has an elite burst, and Mike Green really lights it up in our AI metrics as well. So what are you seeing in those two players who may not have the name brand of a Penn State or an Alabama behind them, but seem to be really successful to NFL front offices and may jump into the first or second round?
Yeah, we'll have to see more in terms of like my final grade from the Senior Bowl. Like that event was made for guys like that. But with Mike Green, we got to see him against Virginia Tech and Ohio State this year. I thought in both those games he was awesome, even if we didn't get to really see him go against Josh Simmons in that Ohio State game, who's their left tackle, who would have been probably a first rounder, terrible knee injury. We'll see how he recovers. But Mike Green is just bendy and explosive. You mentioned how his first step, but first step is really only as good as what you do with it. And he pairs it with this ability to get to the corner and bend back to quarterbacks that's, nothing short of elite. And at his size, 6'4", to have that combination, I think he ends up a first rounder. Walker is a little bit of a different animal in that he is a big boy. I mean, he is solid. I keep going back to this one rep I saw from him. I can't remember the exact game, but he's tracking backside on outside zone away, and he just cuts inside his offensive tackle immediately, and he meets his own defensive tackle. I looked up the guy's weight. It was like 315 pounds. He meets his own defensive tackle who had gotten around his block, and his defensive tackle that he hits crumples to the floor. And David Walker looks like he didn't even like bat an eye that he just hit this guy and knocked him on the ground. Like, he is so solidly built. Some of the most dominant football tape you'll ever see, at regardless of level. And the only like weird thing about him is I think he's going to be a 25-year-old rookie. He's very much on the old side, but his tape is incredible. So those two guys, I know with the transfer portal, it's a rarity now for these guys to stay at Marshall, Central Arkansas, not move up a level. But what they both put on tape this last year was special. And if they can like maintain that level or come close to it at the Senior Bowl, I think both could be first rounders.
It's going to be awesome to give them a look at the Senior Bowl. And I always love propping up some Southland Conference prospects. Mike, thank you for joining me. You can check out Mike on the Pushing the Pile podcast, cbssports.com, and on Twitter at Mike Renner _. Signing off from Mike Renner, CBS Sports, Sam Brookhouse, Sumer Sports. Thank you for listening. So we want to thank Mike Renner for coming on and talking with us. We love Mike and are excited to read all of his work at cbssports.com. You can also find him at Mike Renner _ on Twitter. So me and Stopsky are going to speed run the last few picks of the draft that are already locked in. Stopsky, you're on the clock with the 49ers, a team that pretty heavily regressed this year. What do you think will solve the problems for the 49ers?
So the Niners, I think, are still a really good team, just had a lot of bad injury luck. So right now, I'm going to slot to them the best player available, James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee, who at one point was considered the lock for #1 overall pick. Obviously, he fell. Abdul Carter took his spot as best edge rusher, but like, he's still a really good edge rusher, 99th percentile in our pass rush finish and get off metrics. He's a true playmaker at the edge spot. It just feels like the rich getting richer, even though they had a down year in San Fran.
Right. As Mike just said, I think the edge rushing position is going to be one where any given player could hit, or all of them can hit. There's a lot of talent in this draft. Moving forward to the Cowboys, Ashton Jeanty, I think, is going to be their selection here. I don't know if me as an analyst would select Ashton Jeanty, but I think when we've seen the Cowboys be successful, they've had a really successful running game. I think adding Ashton Jeanty and his extremely gaudy AI metrics when it comes to elusivity, when it comes to breaking tackles, when it comes to rush yards over expected, and adding that to a run game that has an ascendant interior offensive line and Rico Dowdle is just going to be what the Cowboys will want to do. Moving forward to the Dolphins, who you got, Stopsky?
So Calais Campbell's hidden free agency. Derek Harmon, who's a pretty similar defensive tackle, is available. 100th percentile AI pass rushing grade. Ridiculous. Slide him right in.
I love this pick. I think Derek Harmon is underrated in this draft. I think a lot of the Oregon folks are going to end up being good players. Moving forth into Indianapolis, there's a lot that could break for Indianapolis. They have kind of a shifting defense. Defense was supposed to be their cornerstone this year, particularly the two defensive tackles who did play well, Grover Stewart and DeForest Buckner. They drafted Latu last year. I think based on the rules we have set up here, Nick Scourton's probably the pick for them at the edge position. They didn't get a ton of production out of their edge positions this year, and frankly, their defense was the reason why we don't see them in the playoffs. They gave up 45 points, Stopsky, to your hapless Giants at the end of the year. I think there's another move that they
don't
can
you
make
dare
here.
slander Drew Lock like that. Drew Lock is franchise quarterback #1, baby.
Well, I mean, hey, we'll see, but there's a lot of question marks right now around Indianapolis. You know, a big piece coming out of The Athletic about them. I think another direction that they could perhaps go is to try to buffer the pass catching room. Andy Richardson going into his third year. Got to make some decisions about him after that third year. I think maybe they could go tight end here, but in the context of this draft, I think they go Nick Scourton. Moving forth into Atlanta. Atlanta's offense looking very good. Atlanta's defense looking very not good, looking quite old up in the front. Who do you think slots in there?
Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, I think fits in pretty well. Grady Jarrett's almost 32 years old. That defense that let Carolina put 44 points on them and knocked them out of the playoffs. It was rough to watch when I was pulling for Atlanta, even though our boy Eric works for Carolina. I do love Carolina, but really wanted Atlanta at the playoffs this year. And watching their defense give those kind of points, like, you need help on defense. The offense is fine right now. So Walter Nolan in his 99th AI run defense grade. I mean, I'm not using grade, right? Walter Nolan is 99th percentile AI run defense metric. Put him in there, man. They need to fix that defense if they're going to make a run at the AFC South, NFC South.
This is a portion of the draft where it's like teams that have set players and they could kind of break anyway, but it seems like they should just draft the most talented player. I love Walter Nolan. I think he's an excellent player. I'm really excited to see where he's going to land. Looking at the Cardinals with the next pick, this is a real question mark because they've kind of locked in a lot of their defensive players. I think Garrett Williams was a very good player at the cornerback position. They extended Budda Baker. They have Mac Wilson at the linebacker position. They have Zaven Collins kind of coming off the edge as well. This is also an interesting part of the draft where, in terms of the consensus big board, there's still a lot of edge talent, but you don't want to reach too far for that edge talent. You may be able to get those guys with later picks. It's just an interesting kind of conglomeration, interesting gumbo. That's why I think the Cardinals go with the best player on the board here, Jalen Walker out of Georgia, the linebacker, to just shore up their defense a little bit and replace Kaiser White, who was not immensely productive this year. This is going to be my favorite pick of the draft, the one after this, Stopsky. I think the Bengals can go so many directions with this pick, and this could be a franchise-defining, a job-defining pick for everyone in that front office and on that roster. What do you think the best direction for them to go is?
So my initial thought was defense, right? Because that defense did not look good this year. But then, like, do you want to pick a defensive player that can maybe take a bad defense to an okay defense while your excellent offense regresses to just kind of okay, as Gesicki and T Higgins hit free agency and probably both will not be retained? I was looking at Luther Burton over at Mizzou, or Tyler Warren from Penn State, man. And it's like, all right, well, it's receivers, tight end. Usually I would take the receiver, but man, Tyler Warren is just so good. He's in the 98th percentile in our AI receiving grade. And he looks it on film. Like, that kid looks incredible. I think this is going to be a debate we're going to have all year of receivers, tight end. We'll see who they can bring in free agency if they do. But right now, I think it's still pass catcher.
You mentioned the tight end class. I think this is a uniquely superpowered tight end class as well. Colson Loveland's another guy who is on the board that I think people will consider taking, particularly if Tyler Warren ends up moving up the board a little bit. You know, Penn State running drop back passes with Tyler Warren. He's really a guy who can cause problems out there. Looking at the Seahawks, it's another team that could really go several different directions. I think they kind of cobbled together their defense on the fly last year, but it ended up working. Ernest Jones at the linebacker position. They kind of have set players in Leonard Williams and Spoon out there at the cornerback position. I think they just need to protect Geno Smith or whoever quarterback they plan to move forward with in the future. They have good players all across this team. Looking to replace their offensive coordinator, I think, is probably really the shift that's going to make a difference for this team. And with all that in mind, I think they just go chalk. They go with Josh Simmons, the offensive lineman, to shore up that offensive line and protect their quarterback a little bit more. Stopsky, any last thoughts about these top picks?
They're going to change a lot in the next few weeks. So, like, the time between the last snap of the regular season and the Super Bowl, this first round, especially picks like 10 through 32, change so much because we're going to see GMs get hired, coaches get hired. We're going to see the ending of the playoffs, and also as analysts start to dig in more on these players now that the season is over. Some guys that maybe shouldn't have been so highly rated are going to start to fall down the board and be some guys that maybe we didn't hear about too much. We're going to see in Mobile or Dallas that are going to rise up the board. So I love this time of the year. It's a lot of volatility.
Certainly. And the thing that's always been so interesting to me is, like, the regular NCAA season has been over for 2 months now, Stopsky. Like, I get that people will be continuing to work through their mock draft, but, you know, the pen is to the paper. The guys have their film out at this point, so it's always fun to see, you know, when someone just shoots up out of nowhere, even if they're, you know, a player, particularly at the combine, where it's like, how much does the combine really matter? So there's going to be a lot of fun stuff, and moreover, there's going to be a lot of fun stuff on this podcast, Stopsky,
That is
where,
true.
you know, former general managers and people like that, people in the industry, get to come in and explain to us why things like that may happen and explain their processes. And so I'm really excited to do it with you, and I'm really excited for the true season, draft season. He's Matthew Stopsky. I'm Sam Brookhouse signing off from Sumer Sports. Thank you for having us.